We refer to the classical period from 462 BC to 322 BC, the era of direct democracy in ancient Athens. In ancient Greece, the electoral process was called eresis, selection, and the elected officials were known as eretoi, elected ones. The word vote originates from the ancient verb sao, meaning to rub or make something smooth. Thus, it probably referred to a small stone that had been smoothed by friction. The election of officials took place mainly in the agora, and voting was done by voice, meaning everyone shouted together. Other voting methods included raising hands or standing, using pebbles, shells, etc. According to estimates, the general population of the city-state of Athens was about 250,000, of which 50,000 were citizens. In ancient Athens' direct democracy, citizens did not elect representatives, but made legislative and executive decisions themselves. The political bodies of the time were three: the Assembly of the People, Ecclesia, the Council of 500, Boule, and the Courts, Heliaia. The Assembly of the People was the main democratic gathering in ancient Athens and was held on the Nix Hill, in the ancient Agora, or at the Theater of Dionysus. From 451 BC, all adult Athenians with full political rights were allowed to participate, which they acquired if both of their parents were Athenian citizens and they had completed their 2-year military service. Women, medics, foreign residents, and slaves who had no political rights, as well as those who had committed offenses, dishonorable, were excluded. The Assembly of the People was the supreme organ of Athenian democracy from which all powers emanated. It discussed important matters concerning the constitution, voted on laws, elected military and financial officials, Aristotle, Athenian constitution, decided on the number of citizens, medics, and slaves to be enlisted, imposed the death penalty or exile, and confiscated property. It also determined Athens' foreign policy, made decisions on peace or war, alliances with other cities and states, accepted foreign ambassadors, and elected Athens ambassadors. Participation in the assembly was voluntary. Only those present could vote, and at least 6,000 citizens were required for the vote to be valid. To allow even the poorest Athenians to participate, the ecclesiastica, a participation payment, was established, paid to the first 6,000 citizens from the public treasury as compensation for their lost income from work during the meeting. The assembly met all day, and its agenda was prepared by the Council of 500. In the 5th century, there were 10 regular assemblies each year, one every month, and extraordinary ones could be convened whenever necessary. In the next century, 40 assemblies of the people were scheduled, 4 each month, one of which was called the main assembly. The process in the assembly began with proposers, boulemois, who could be any citizen according to the principle of equality of speech, isagoria, proposing a solution for any issue, e.g., war or peace, foreign relations, finances, etc. This was followed by a discussion and a vote. A key element in the discussions was freedom of speech, parrhesia. Voting in the assembly was public, done by raising hands, and a 9-member electoral committee counted the raised hands to determine the result. The 9 vote counters, the electoral committee, were randomly selected in the morning of the process before the session of the assembly to prevent bribery. Then the decisions were approved as temporary or special decrees, resolutions, and laws were established. The assembly also ensured that the decisions were carried out and officials performed their duties properly. Athenian citizens were divided into 10 tribes. From each tribe, 50 men were selected for the Council of 500, usually by lottery, for a 1-year term. A citizen could be a member of the council twice in their lifetime. The Council of 500 was responsible for the daily agendas of the assembly and for the official execution of political decisions made in the assembly. It was responsible for about half of the decrees approved by the assembly. The council met daily, except on holidays. Only eligible citizens, men aged 30 and above, without previous criminal convictions could serve. The leadership of the council, the Prytaneus, alternated between the delegations of the tribes, and a new Prytania was selected every month by lottery. The responsible Prytanis was replaced daily by the 50 members who were again chosen by lottery. After the reforms of Ephialtes and Pericles in the mid-5th century BC, The council took on many of the administrative and judicial functions of the Areopagus, which retained its traditional right to hear murder cases. It oversaw the state's finances, the navy, the cavalry, religious matters, construction and shipping issues, and care for the disabled and orphans. It examined the public officials both before and after they left office to ensure honest accounting and loyalty to the state. It also examined certain cases of public officials charged with high crimes, mismanagement, or dereliction of duty. Around 450 BC, a payment was introduced for those serving in the council. The council was considered the cornerstone of the democratic constitution, providing a place for daily activities and holding the various administrative functions of the government together. Due to the rotation of members, the council was considered free from factional dominance of any kind. Though there are indications that wealthier citizens served disproportionately more than poorer citizens, this may be due to the significant time commitment required, time that poorer citizens could not afford to dedicate. The Heliaia was the popular court, the supreme body of the people in administering justice. Every year, 6,000 Helias were chosen by lottery from each tribe. Of these, usually 2,000 Helias were sufficient for the daily needs of the courts. Anyone who had completed the age of 30 and did not owe money to the state or have their political rights revoked could become a Helias through the lottery. The Heliaia was divided into 10 sections, which usually judged separately, but in serious cases, at least 2 or more sections judged together. The selection of judges and their distribution was also by lottery. The Helias began their work by moonlight, before dawn, to give their details. Each carried an identity plate, typically a bronze plaque with the name patronymic and the district to which they belonged. The plate also bore one of the first 10 letters of the alphabet from A to K, indicating which section of the tribe they belonged to. For the purposes of the lottery, special machines, lottery devices, were used. The lotteries featured 10 vertical rows of notches, one for each Athenian tribe, into which the judicial tablets were placed. Along the left side was a hollow bronze tube, into which white and black marble balls were dropped randomly. If a white ball was released when the crank at the bottom of the tube was turned, the 10 citizens, one from each tribe, whose tablets had been placed in the first horizontal row of notches, were selected as judges for that day. If a black ball was drawn, those citizens were relieved of their duties for that day. The process was repeated until the required number of judges was reached. Before the trial began each day, the judges in the courts where they would serve were chosen by lottery. This way, the litigants did not know their judges, nor the court, until the time of the trial. Therefore, they could not bribe them. The court was named according to the color of the lintel above its entrance. For example, there was the Phoenix Court, distinguished by its red lintel, the Batrachian by its green, etc. The court's decision was rendered the same day after a vote of the judges. Each judge held 2 small bronze discs, the votes. The perforated vote was a conviction, while the solid one was an acquittal. The juror approached 2 urns, dropped the stone with their verdict in the first and threw the unused one in the second. From 681 BC, we had the Archon Eponymos, a political office in ancient Athens. He was one of the 9 archons, specifically the first. The succession of the eponymous archons is of significant historical importance, as the year was named after him, and he was listed first at the beginning of laws, treaties, and public inscriptions. The other 8 archons were the Basileus, the Polemarch, and the 6 Thesmothetai. The Basileus had no political power and only handled religious and judicial duties, while the Polemarch held military command. The role of the 6th Thesmothetai was to maintain the old customs and laws, the Thesmia, and create new ones. The 9 archons of Athens were elected by the Eupatridae of Attica and came from their class. Initially, the archons served for life, then for 10 years, and finally for 1 year. Every year, the 10 Athenian generals were also elected by a simple vote with a raised or lowered thumb from the assembly. Special elections for ostracism and exile. In Athens, if a public figure was dishonored or became too popular for the good of democracy, they could be exiled for 10 years through special elections of ostracism, derived from the ancient Greek word for a shard of pottery. In an ostracism election, each member of the assembly would take a small piece of pottery and was asked to inscribe the name of someone who deserved to be exiled. If at least 6,000 people wrote the same name, the person with the most votes was banished from Athens for 10 years. A famous example is Themistocles, the Athenian military hero of the Battle of Salamis against the Persians, who was ostracized in 472 BC and died in exile. There are indications that his political enemies pre-inscribed his name on hundreds or thousands of pottery shards and distributed them to illiterate members of the assembly. Accountability. In ancient Athens, there was absolute and strict accountability. After performing public duties, any citizen who had taken on such duties was required to provide a full account. This also applied to political speakers in the assembly. There were many services of the Athenian state that were not covered by permanent public employees, as today, but were handled by citizens selected by lottery for a term of 1 year.